How's it going, everyone? I'm Brian. I'm a videographer and photographer based in Brooklyn. And with me, I have the Leica SL2-S. So all the footage that you've just watched before was shot with this camera. With this review, how I'm gonna go is I'm gonna talk about all the specs first. Feel free to skip it. I'll put it in the time code where you can see my personal thoughts. And, once I'm done with the specs, then I'll give you my opinion on how this camera is to use as a professional videographer. So let's get started. The Leica SL2-S, which came out in December of 2020, has an IP54 certified rated body. This is one of the few cameras on the market that has a proper IP certification. So IP54 means it's dust proof and it's splash proof, meaning that if it's heavy rain and there's a lot of dust in the air, this camera is going to be completely fine. A lot of mirrorless cameras say they're weather resistant, but they don't give a proper IP certification. So with this, you know for sure it can handle the elements. This is a pretty big camera body. It's about 931 grams. If you're used to something like a DSLR or any of the Panasonic bodies, that should be fine. But it's definitely bigger than a lot of mirrorless cameras on the market. It's got a really solid grip. All 5 fingers can wrap around it comfortably. It's got an EVF of 5.76 million dots, so amazing viewfinder. It's got an LCD of 2.1 million dots. It's got a top status display, and it's got a bunch of different custom function buttons. It's got 2 in the front of the camera. It's got 2 on top. It's got 1 by the viewfinder. It's got a joystick and a labeled function button by the LCD, which you can map to anything you like. Inputs and ports. This is the amazing thing, is that most Leica cameras do not have these options. You have a headphone port, a microphone jack, you have full-size HDMI, which kind of surprised me, and USB-C for data transfer or if you want to charge on the go. In terms of storage, you have dual UHS 2 SD card slots, perfectly fine. And then for the power options, there's 2 things. So the original SL2-S came with the BP SCL4. So this battery is about 1800 milliamp hours. And then there's a newer battery, the BP SCL6, which came out with the Leica Q3. And it's all interchangeable between the Q and the SL system. This new battery is about 2200 milliamp hours. So if you can get that, that would probably be a better deal. All right, so let's move on to the sensor. This camera has a 24.6 megapixel full frame backside illuminated CMOS sensor. It's got 5-axis IBIS, rated about 5.5 stops, so pretty good for today's age. It uses the Leica L mount, so tons of different lens choices here. It has a little bit of an outdated autofocus system. It's 225 contrast detect autofocus points. It's got eye, face, and body detect autofocus. But let's move on to the shutter and some of the image specs. It's got a mechanical and electronic shutter. The mechanical shutter maxes out at 8 thousandths of a second. The electronic shutter maxes out at 16 thousandths of a second. And you can shoot up to 9 frames on the mechanical shutter, which is pretty good, and up to 25 frames per second with the electronic shutter. Now, that part was pretty surprising to me because that surpasses a lot of the newer Canon, Sony bodies. It actually has a multi-shot feature, which is kind of rare for a 24 megapixel sensor. So it can do a little sensor shift and it can create a higher resolution image rated at 96 megapixels. I think this is an amazing feature because most of the cheaper mirrorless cameras that a lot of other companies provide do not have this. You're going to need to buy some of their higher megapixel, Sony A7R line style cameras to even have this pixel shift mode to get a higher resolution image. And finally, in terms of the stills, it shoots 14-bit DNGs or JPEGs, and you can write these to a single SD card. You can back up, a couple different options there. Now let's move on to video, which is one of the main focal points of the Leica SL2-S. The Leica SL2-S can shoot 10-bit 422 video from 24 to 60 frames per second in 4K. It can also shoot 12-bit RAW to an external monitor, not an external SSD. It has to be through a monitor. In terms of codec, it can shoot long op for lower bit rate or all intra at 400 megabits per second. And it can shoot UHD 4K or DCI Cinema 4K, which I think is really cool that you have those different options. And you don't have to shoot at 23.976, broadcast frame rate. You can shoot at 24 solid. In terms of slow-mo, you can shoot up to 180 frames per second in 1080p at 420 8-bit. I think that should be fine. It would have been nice to have 120 frames per second in 4K, even if it was a crop, but at least you have that option. In terms of the video gamma profiles, there's Rec 709, standard, there's Leica Log, and HLG. Leica also provides their own picture styles that come in like standard, vivid, natural, monochrome. You know, if you're not someone that wants to deal with color grading, you can try out those options. I shot most of my video in Leica Log that you've seen, and then downloaded their Rec 2020 profile and just applied that into some color correction. The great thing about this camera is it has all the modern functions you need in terms of video assist features. So you have your focus peaking, you've got focus magnification, you've got a really nice waveform, you've even got guidelines for different aspect ratios like CinemaScope if you do want to crop down. I kind of wish it had a D-squeeze, but you know, it's nice to have that. All right, those were like the main features of the Leica SL2-S. I'll have a link to the spec sheet in the description if you do want to explore more of the camera's technical specifications. But here are my thoughts, at least in terms of the body. And sorry if I'm looking at my notepad a lot, I just wrote so much that I really want to reference. His body is extremely heavy. I don't think there's any way of avoiding that in terms of mirrorless style cameras, right? If you're coming from a DSLR, if you're coming from medium format Fuji's or the Panasonic S1 series, this is, you know, not going to be unfamiliar to you. It's 931 grams, like as I've stated before. My Sony a7 IV, which I usually shoot with, is 658 grams, and this is with the battery and media included. So if you're gonna get the body, be prepared for it to be very, very heavy. And if you see the L mount glasses right next to me here, they're also not small. Like these are really heavy. So if you pair the L mount glass with the SL2-S body, your arms might hurt if you're shooting all day. It's incredibly simple, true to the Leica brand, right? The Leica logo is blacked out. I think there is supposed to be a red dot here, but this is a loaner from Leica, so didn't have the Leica logo applied in here. It's a sticker covering it. I don't want to touch it. But otherwise, there's no labeling like C1, C2, C3 on any of the buttons. And I will also talk about later that you can map all these to different functions that you like. One thing I don't like is that they call this top dial a front dial, but the way my hand is holding this, I really want the front dial to actually be positioned closer to my index finger where the shutter button is. Because it's so recessed and actually on the top plate of the camera, I feel like my finger's always in a very awkward position to try to reach back and you know, adjust any settings. And usually if my eye is up to the viewfinder, I have to like pull away just so I make sure I see where my fingers are positioned. Kind of a small complaint, but you know, you would think, especially with Leica's user experience being one of their strengths, that they would either, you know, change the position of this or actually include a front dial. A small complaint though, small complaint. I love the uniform look of this camera. Again, like, you know, say what you want about the price, but people will walk by and say like, wow, that is a beautiful product. And you know, there's something about it where it just feels really nice to look and hold. And so that experience I think is pretty important if you're shooting a lot, and it's maybe, even if it's not for a job, you know, you want to enjoy the tool that you're using. One thing I was very shocked about is that it does have the proper inputs here. So like the audio jack, the mic jack, the full size HDMI was a huge surprise. So that's gonna be nice if you want to shoot 12-bit external RAW. The only thing that did bother me was that the rubber covers, I have a feeling this will wear down over time. And because they're molded to cover the specific inputs, that if they do wear down a little bit over time, there might be gaps in the seal. So, you know, if you are shooting in the rain, you are shooting with just a lot of dust or something in the air, you know, you might think, oh, I'm secure, but you know, if you shoot with this a lot over time, this could wear down and maybe there could be gaps in the seal. Obviously, I only had this for about a week, so I can't say that for sure, but I would have preferred if they had the same cover that the right side of the camera has to cover the dual SD card slots. Again, it still looks amazing. It's just like a thing that I was kind of thinking about certain hypotheticals if the camera does wear down over time. So overall, I like the body, but the one thing that really annoyed me was the sensor for the EVF. It is really finicky. And even right when I started testing out the camera, I had problems with the EVF staying on. If I pull my face away, the LCD wouldn't activate until I was like a full meter away. I think what's happening is that the sensor might have like condensation or something built up from, you know, if you're too close to the viewfinder. And so it thinks that you're still looking through the viewfinder. The great thing that Leica did with this camera in particular is that it saved your settings and your custom function keys according to the profile you're in. So you have different user profiles, but you also have your stills mode and your video mode. So if you're switching from video to stills, you still have the shortcut key saved when you're in video mode to certain focus assist settings. Say if you save one of your custom function buttons in the front to focus magnification, that would change when you go to stills, but when you go back to video, it stays the same. And I'm really glad that Leica took this camera seriously for a lot of hybrid shooters out there. So the fact that you even have a really nice exposure waveform graph, you have the aspect ratio lines if you want to crop down. I think the only thing that bothered me within the UI itself is that the battery indicator does not have a numerical value attached to it. So when you look at it, you have to guess, is it 20%, 50%, 70%? And you have no idea how much time you have left. And if you have the older BP SL4 batteries with the smaller milliamp hours, then you're probably going to have to be a little bit more wary about how much time you have left. And from what I've heard, I haven't ran into this myself, so I can't confirm. If you are on the lower end of your battery life, it will stop shooting 4K footage. I never ran into that because I think I was shooting a little bit more sporadically throughout the day, but just a thing to be aware of. And I wish Leica would just update the firmware, include a numerical value onto the battery life, but I guess we'll have to wait till the SL3. All right, and let's finally talk about the image you can get out of this camera. The image and the low light capability of the Leica SL2-S is amazing. It's on par with any other mirrorless camera out there. The noise is so controlled. A lot of times you can go into those other extended ISO ranges on other cameras, but you're gonna get a lot of color noise, or the pattern of the noise just starts to change when you're in low light scenarios. But it's really good at making sure that you get like a filmic type of controlled noise when you're going to the crazy 50,000, 100,000 ISO. Usually when you're going into those higher ISO ranges, you're going to get a lot of color noise. So you get like purple, green, blue specks all over the screen, but that never happens. With the noise coming out at those higher extended ISO ranges is very uniform and filmic. I think the ability to shoot 10-bit 422 log footage and potentially 12-bit RAW externally on a Leica camera is extremely cool. Let's talk about the negatives in terms of the image and the technology inside here. The autofocus, unfortunately, is not very good. For stills, I think it's completely fine. In low light, it might hunt a little bit, but I think it's, I think you can capture what you need to. You're not gonna miss too much. But for video, this was a bit of a struggle. For the first couple days, I was testing the autofocus with the Elmarit lenses and the SL2-S. The EVF will tell you that you're locked onto a subject. So if I'm shooting a person, there will be a green box around that person will be outlined. It won't be jumpy or anything. It's following my subject perfectly through the EVF. But when I look at the footage later, I noticed that it's hunting. So eventually I realized, hey, I gotta go to manual focus. But with a lot of these Elmarit lenses is that they're all focused by wire. So if you need hard stops, that's not gonna happen because these are acceleration based. So if you focus too fast, it'll jump a crazy distance. If you focus too slow, then it goes in little increments. I found that switching to M mount lenses adapted through an M to L mount adapter is the way to go because you have hard stops, you have smaller lens, and I'll talk a lot about about the options that you have in terms of lenses in the next section. All right, let's talk about the lenses. So Leica did package this and loan this to me. This is the SL2-S, obviously. This is the Vario Elmarit 24-70 f2.8. This is the 50mm APO Summicron spherical. This Vario Elmarit, I think, is a little bit older than the APO Summicron series. I think they came out like a 35, 24 maybe, and this 50. So this is a little bit newer than this lens, but the autofocus was still performing the same on both these lenses. This Vario Elmarit 24-70 is a little bit controversial because basically confirmed, through the internet that this lens is the same as the Sigma 24-70 DGDN. Beautiful lens, and I think the Sigma 24-70, which I'm actually shooting with right now, is my favorite lens that I've used in the mirrorless. If you told me it was Leica glass, I would believe it. So if you hold up the Vario Elmarit 24-70 with the Sigma lens. The glass inside, the housing looks very similar. That's my only gripe with this, and it's really expensive. I think it's about like $3,000. Sigma does make an L-mount version of this lens, the 24-70 DGDN. And to be quite honest, I think you can get the same optical performance. I don't know about the electronic connection, but in terms of the image, it'll probably be the same. The 50 APO Summicron spherical this is an amazing lens. It's about the same size as, you know, a lot of 50 primes out in the market nowadays. So it's not light, but, you know, still a pretty damn good image. And this lens is produced in the Wetzlar factory. You're getting some really pristine craftsmanship with these lenses. Finally here, we have a M-mount lens. This is the Voigtlander 35 1.4 multi-coated version 2, adapted through Leica's M to L adapter to the SL2-S. So about 75% of the shots and video I took were with the Voigtlander 35 1.4, especially since I have hard stops on the focus ring. You know, I can switch my aperture quickly, so I don't need to rely on mapping that to a dial on the camera. And it just made everything so much lighter. And the amazing thing about being able to use M-mount glass on the SL2-S is that the SL2-S has default profiles built in that has the data for every single Leica M-mount glass. So if you're adapting like a 50 Summicron onto the SL2-S, the camera will recognize the lens. Let's go through some of the first questions that people have. Is this good for me if I don't have any other Leica products? To be quite honest, if you don't have the money, do not get this. And that goes for any other piece of gear. Like, don't get a Sony A1, don't get a Canon R3, like don't get the top of the line camera if you can't afford it and can't estimate how much money you'll need to spend for the glass. The Leica brand is not cheap, like that goes across the board. You can probably get the SL2-S, which retails about $5,200 USD for something about $3,000 to $3,500 USD now. And I would usually recommend everyone get their camera gear used. For people that are already in the Leica system, so let's say you own a Leica M rangefinder, whether that's film or digital, if you have M-mount glass, then you can get the SL2-S, which is a perfect camera body if you want to shoot video in tandem with your M rangefinder to shoot stills. And you can adapt all your M-mount glass onto the SL2-S with the adapter. I think it's a perfect combination if you're out and about. That way you don't have to purchase M-mount glass and feel like you're, you know, starting to acquire like a bunch of different system lenses and then you still have your M-mount glass. Like, it's really good to pair with your other Leica cameras. If you love the Leica brand, if you already own, you know, some Leica M lenses or cameras, this is the camera to get if you want to shoot video. And I wouldn't recommend that if the image wasn't that good, but the video you can get out of this rivals like any other mirrorless camera on the market. So it makes me pretty excited to see what Leica has next with the SL3. I think that might be a serious contender, you know, besides the price, along with other mirrorless cameras that primarily aim for videographers. And for the next iteration of the camera, you know, I'm really hoping that they kind of mess with the form, like the dials and the buttons. You know, it wasn't unusable, but I think there are certain quality of life things that they can modify with the body of this camera. So I know that was pretty wordy and there was a lot of talk about this camera, but I was still so shocked of the footage and image that I got from this camera. I really wish I could have held onto it a little bit longer, especially since I have a couple trips coming up, but sadly I have to return this to Leica. You know, they didn't sponsor any of this, by the way. This was just a loaner because they wanted me to test it out. But I would recommend renting, or, you know, if you really want to shoot video and you're in the Leica system, just don't wait and just get this. It's amazing. So thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more videos coming out with more Leica gear, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch this.